Welcome, welcome. This is going to be a lot of fun. When this came across my desk, it was like one of those, it was just an immediate yes. I'm really excited. I feel a tremendous amount of honor and privilege to be in the room with the two presenters today and listen to this presentation. And so this presentation is titled Gossip as Revolution, How Women's Talk Fuels Democratic Resistance. And so without further ado, I'm going to let the speakers have the floor.
Okay, well, my name's Lily-Harari. All right. When trouble gathers, trouble starts. Or when women gather, trouble starts. It's a phrase used to tease and sometimes to belittle, but today we invite you to hear it differently, to hear it as a promise, a sign that change might already be underway. Because when women gather, things shift. Stories surface, power moves, and yes, sometimes they disrupt what needs to be disrupted. We're here to reclaim gossip, not as petty or idle chatter, but as something with teeth, something that helps build community, questions those in power, and refuses to stay quiet. So I started thinking about all this during a conversation with my brother. He had cracked a joke about how women in our family gossip too much, and even though he meant it playfully, it really bothered me. I couldn't stop thinking about how wrong he was, and to be fair, this is not unusual for him. But I thought about how much wisdom and work happens when the women in our family talk amongst ourselves. In my tribe, we're a matriarchal community. This means that women own the property and the homes. We vote the men in and out of positions of leadership, and the women's families are responsible for raising the children. When the matriarch speaks, the people listen. So when someone calls what we do gossip, I have to laugh, because to me, it sounds like responsibility, and it sounds like power. Gossip, or what we might call women's talk, has long been dismissed in patriarchal cultures. But when we really listen, we're able to pick up on the kind of talk that clarifies what's happening under the surface, who in our community is struggling, where harm is being done, and what issues need to be taken care of before it's too late. Our thesis today is this: women's gossip has the power to fuel democratic resistance, support community care, and prompt grassroots organization, especially for marginalized women. And if we start to value it, really value it, we might change how democracy works altogether.
Hi, my name is Kayla Ceja, and today I'm going to start with a story about Spider-Woman. Long before the world took shape, we know that there was only endless space and silence. From this vast nothingness emerged Spider-Woman, ancient and wise. With deliberate care, she spun her web across the void, wearing the fabric of the universe strand by strand, north, south, east, and west, each direction held in place by the threads from her hand. She wove light and shadow, land and sky, breath and bone. To them, she imparted essential wisdom. Everything is connected, she said. Just as each strand supports the web, each of you supports the world. We start with Spider-Woman because she taught people how to weave, not just thread, but families and communities. She also showed them how to care for one another, how to share stories, how to remember, and how to resist. And there's a warning woven into her story, too, that there will be times when forces try to unravel our threads and to silence our voices. And in those moments, Spider-Woman reminds us, just talk to each other. Don't go quiet. That is where our strength is, in our connections, in our stories we pass along, and in our relationships we keep showing up for. Interconnectedness with all relations is central to understanding your community struggles, and once we achieve this, a platform for democracy can finally begin. Now, think about the women who were enslaved in the American South. When they leaned close in to the kitchens or while they were out in the fields, it wasn't just small talk. This is how information moved, who had been taken, who was sick, who might be running. It was how people stayed alive, how they held on to each other even when the world was severing their relationships. Who was sick, who was planning to run. in these conversations that people were able to survive and escape without talk. The generations who are here today would cease to exist. And even when they were planning an escape, those whispers were a lifeline, a way to care for each other, to warn, to grieve, and pass down what little they were allowed to keep. Talking became a way to hold on to each other in a world trying to tear them apart. The same is true for Indigenous women. Colonization came with violence, but also silence. It tried erasing languages, ceremonies, and stories. But women kept talking, around fires, during ceremonies, sometimes just even walking together. They told the stories anyways, sometimes in code, sometimes in rhythm and song. That kind of storytelling is resistance. And for immigrant women, especially those working domestic or low-wage jobs, it's often how you stay safe. You learn who to work for, what neighborhoods to avoid, and which hospitals won't report you. That information isn't written down. You get it from someone's auntie, a coworker in the break room, or the woman braiding hair in the back of the shop. So no, it's not just talk, it's how people survive, how they build networks, and how to make sure no one gets left behind. When institutions don't protect you and power isn't on your side, these conversations become a kind of infrastructure, a quiet one, but strong one, a deeply political one. Because at the heart of it, gossip is how those who were pushed to the margins stay connected, stay alert, and stay alive.
All right. So long before this country was called America, before presidents, senators, and policy briefs, there were women who led with something else entirely. Memory, conversation, and care. Among the Haudenosaunee people, what settlers would later call the Iroquois, there were clan mothers. These weren't women standing behind powerful men. They were the power. They were the ones who chose the chiefs, and if a man lost his way, stopped listening to the people, stopped honoring the responsibilities that came with leadership, it was the clan mothers who would quietly and firmly remove them. But their strength didn't come from loud speeches or threats. It came from something quieter and deeper, the ability to listen, to remind and gather the people, to ask the hard questions, to remind everyone of their obligations to the land, to the ancestors, and to each other. They didn't rush to fix problems with punishments. They leaned into the hard work of talking, not the kind of talking where someone waits their turn to argue back, but the kind that builds consensus, the kind that draws on generations of wisdom passed around fires, over meals, in quiet spaces where women speak freely. I think about those women when I look around today, when I see women organizing in group chats, in kitchens, at salons, and yes, online, because that spirit, that way of leading by remembering, by talking, by caring, that didn't disappear, it just changed forms. And it's still leading us today. The tradition of women gathering to speak, to remember, and to lead, it didn't vanish. It simply found new spaces. Today, gossip shows up in DMs, in group chats, in comment sections, and hashtags. What once happened over kitchen tables and back fences is now happening across social media platforms. But the heart of it hasn't changed. Women are still using informal talk to organize and protect and to resist. Think about the Me Too movement. That started not with a press conference or a policy. It started with stories. Women sharing what happened to them, quietly at first and then loudly. And when one woman spoke, another followed, and then another, until the entire system started to shake. The same goes for Black Lives Matter. While the movement has many roots, part of its power came from the viral posts, whispered names, and women telling the truth about what they were witnessing in their communities. Mothers, sisters, organizers, they didn't wait for permission to speak. They talked to each other, and the world listened. But it's not just about big movements. This kind of resistance is happening quietly all around us. In the informal childcare networks, women trade shifts, share food, keep each other's families afloat, especially when official systems fail. During the pandemic, neighborhood WhatsApp groups run by women created lifelines, spreading resources, countering misinformation, and organizing rent strikes or mutual aid. This isn't charity, it's strategy, and it's nothing new. Let's see. As Patricia Hill Collins points out, women's knowledge traditions have long depended on a process of talking with one another, of passing on wisdom and affirming shared realities. What many dismiss as gossip is, in truth, a form of epistemic resistance, a way of making and protecting knowledge that centers care, trust, and lived experience. Maria Lujonis might call this a form of world traveling, where women move between spaces and identities, using language and relationships to survive systems that were never built for them. These conversations, messy, relational, and embodied, are a kind of freedom work. So yes, today women are still talking, still whispering warnings, still spreading truth, still building political will in spaces that don't look like government offices, but are no less vital. And every time they do, they carry forward the legacy of resistance that has always lived in women's talk. As Robin Wall Kimmerer reminds us, that in Indigenous ways of knowing, it is understood that each living being has a particular role to play, each with its own intelligence, its own spirit, and its own story. In women's talk, these stories are not lost. They're remembered, shared, and activated. And in doing so, they become instructions for survival, blueprints for resistance. And like the clan mothers before them, these women are leading not by title, but by trust.
Over 1,000 years ago, some say 2,000, a dark and violent time engulfed the lands of what we now call the northeastern United States and southeastern Canada. The Mohawk, Oneida, Onondaga, Kiowa, and Seneca nations were at war with one another, caught in a cycle of bloodshed and mourning. Into this chaos came a man known as the Peacemaker, a Huron who crossed Lake Ontario into stone canoe. He carried a powerful message of unity, healing, and peace. The first to accept his vision was a Seneca woman named Ceja, later honored as the Mother of the Nations. Because a woman was the first to receive and support the message of peace, the Peacemaker ensured that women would hold a central and enduring role in the new Confederacy, including the right to nominate and remove chiefs. The Peacemaker's next stop was among the Mohawk, who were skeptical. To test his power, they asked him to climb a tall tree near Canoe Falls, then cut it down, letting him plunge into the rushing waters below. He vanished, but the next morning, smoke rose in the distance. The Peacemaker had survived and rekindled his fire. The Mohawks saw this as a sign and agreed to hear his message. It was in the same village that the Peacemaker met a man burdened by grief who would become his traveling companion. Together, they journeyed to each nation, spreading the great law of peace, a constitution rooted in diplomacy, balance, accountability, and foresight. At the heart of the great law is the 7 generations principle, the idea that every decision leaders must consider the impact on those yet to be born, 7 generations into the future. The importance of 7 generations is a foundational concept within Indigenous communities. It is essential to Indigenous democracy. It challenges us to stretch our moral imagination across time, to live and act with accountability, not just to the present community, but to the ancestors who dreamed of us and the descendants who will inherit our choices. As the American Indian Vine Deloria Jr. Stated, often this popular coined term is often romanticized, and it should be interpreted on a more realistic scale. It is in this realistic scale where resistance flourishes. We are connected to those who came before us, songs, stories, philosophies, and more. This is what shapes tribal nations' priorities and ethics. As we are accountable for realistic relations such as ourselves, siblings, cousins, etc., not just for futuristic generations we cannot imagine. Imagine a world where we live in where one owes nothing to predecessors, but only to prioritize present-day relations. In this world, fundamental kinship ties for generations to come become severed. Our future relatives are left with hardships created by our own framework, in one of stewardship and one of utilizing democracy amongst all community members to accomplish goals that benefit community members. This is seen in countless examples, such as the salmon people, who fought a 20-year battle against the government to restore the salmon in the Klamath River. These issues are fought for and continue to be fought for in large groups amongst tribal nations, showcasing how powerful participatory democracy within a community can be. When we think about gossip through this lens, its revolutionary potential becomes clear. If an issue affects one in the community, it affects all. Women's place in recognizing truth and then sharing it with others becomes a safeguard in the present and seeds for the future. These conversations preserve the ethical memory of communities. They warn, guide, and transmit resilience. They are not fleeting. They are time-traveling technologies of care. In democratic theory, we often emphasize voice, consent, participation. But what about memory? Participatory democracy cannot thrive on amnesia. It needs the quiet stories of survival, the warnings passed down through generations, and the hard-earned wisdom shared in whispers through oral tradition. Indigenous and Black feminist traditions know this well. The ethical life is relational. That democracy must be rooted in care, and that intergenerational storytelling is a radical act of resistance. Colonial and capitalist systems, by contrast, depend on short-term thinking. They erase context and extract without care, and reward forgetfulness. Gossip resists that. It remembers who hurt us, who helped us, what was taken, and how we fought. It keeps alive names of victims, of heroes, of the unspeakable and the sacred. In doing so, it forms an archive of resistance that lives in body and voice, not just on paper. As Maya Angelou states, "I come as one, but stand as 10,000. These stories come from us, but represent the thousands of ancestors who passed along their tradition and values." So when a grandmother warns her granddaughter of a pattern she's seen before, when a cousin whispers what happened at the clinic, when an elder retells how the woman blocked the road to protect the water, they are not simply speaking of the present. They are practicing ethical memory on behalf of the 7th generation. That is democratic care, and that is revolutionary talk.
Okay. Before there was land, there was sky world. One day, a woman fell from the sky, heavy with child, and as she fell, the animals below looked up and rushed to help her. Birds flew together to catch her. The turtle rose from the deep to offer her a resting place. But for her life to grow, she needed land. So the animals dove, one by one, to the bottom of the water to retrieve a little bit of earth. Many failed, but the muskrat surfaced, exhausted, with just a small clump of soil. Sky Woman took that soil, placed it on the turtle's back, and began to dance. Slowly, she danced the earth into being, and that is how Turtle Island, or North America, was formed. The Haudenosaunee people, their story about Sky Woman, is a story about cooperation, creation, and community. Sky Woman didn't create the world alone. She needed help. We don't always think of that as democracy, but it is. As Audre Lorde reminds us, without community, there's no liberation. It's how we hold each other up, make sense of the world together, and how we pass on what we've learned. Let's see. Without community, there is no liberation. It's how we hold each other up, make sense of the world together, and how we pass on what we've learned. And today, when women tell stories, they do what Sky Woman did. They're building ethical worlds with what little they've been given. They're planting memories, naming truth, and preparing the ground for those who come next. Because when we live our ideals, we're not just speaking our values, we're embodying them, repeating them, and teaching them to others. Participatory democracy is not a sterile concept housed in political theory. It lives in how we speak to each other, how we care for each other, and how we remember each other. It lives in the stories we risk telling and the people we trust to carry them forward. We began today by talking about gossip as revolution, as a form of ethical memory, resistance, and care. But what we're really talking about is the practice of living our ideals out loud and in the community. Women's talk, so often dismissed, is actually democracy in motion. It's the sharing of truth, the preservation of knowledge, and the nurturing of futures we may never see, but must still protect. Indigenous principles remind us that ethics isn't just about being right in the moment, it's about being responsible across time, and when we center care, memory, and interconnections, we do more than resist injustice. We imagine beyond it. Thank you.
Thank you all so much. We have plenty of time for questions. Don't hold back, because otherwise I'll fill the space with all of my questions, and you don't want to just hear me talk. So, who would like to kick us off with a question? Don't be shy. This is your opportunity.
Hello. I found the story of Sky Woman very fascinating. And I wonder, as we're in college and we have to take a science class, how do you have both of those stories and enjoy both of those things you're learning about? Does that make sense?
Okay. I'm not sure I understood the question. Do you want to?
Like, to me, they don't, like, I'm in a geology class, we're learning about, like, plate tectonics,
Fun.
you know? So how, with that, I don't know the story of Sky Woman, but I assume you know both about, like, evolution and Sky Woman. So what is your perspective on how those combine or are different?
Well, I think they're different. I think one, you're talking about mythology. You're talking about stories that are supposed to carry meaning behind them. I don't think they're supposed to be taken literally. So, yeah.
There'll be more questions. Don't worry. See, you stepped in the void and took the risk, and he survived. And now you all can survive. Don't make me cold call you. I recognize some of your faces. So, see, eager now. Perfect.
This was more so a historical question, but like, how did the clan mothers get rid of the men who were bothering the community and the peace?
They would actually vote them out. So I don't know if it works exactly the same, since I'm not familiar specifically with Iroquois political structures. But I know in my tribe, when there's a problematic human, they'll get together and they'll just make a vote.
So you talked about Spider Woman and Sky Woman. How are they both connected?
I think they're both connected in the way they give women almost a voice and put them at the front. I think oftentimes in Western academia and Western culture in general, women are often don't have this sort of place or sacredness where these stories almost assign women and remind them that they are sacred. So you're able to apply these principles within these stories to everyday life.
You mentioned like safe spaces for women to have these conversations. How do we now make those safe spaces?
I think that we're already doing a really good job. One of the things that we were talking about prolifically in this talk is creating spaces where women can speak and can talk. This is an excellent example right now of women getting up and talking and sharing our experience. However, you see it in churches, you see it in community get-togethers. There are a lot of spaces specifically, but I think the important part is that a lot of these spaces are informal. I think that when we look at political power, it's usually something that is done on a grand scale with lots of people, and it's slow to respond. And so with a lot of these informal places, these informal spaces where women occupy and have their conversations, we can see changes that are, they can respond to changes that need to happen quickly, which is one of the reasons I think it's important that they remain informal. But yeah.
This is a little bit more of a personal question. I would love to hear from both of you. What is something that you guys like to do in your life that makes you feel more connected to the women around you and to your female ancestors?
Personally, I like to be involved daily with the women in my life. So whether this just be like day-to-day talk, or whether we host group activities where we are also reminded of our cultural ways in these activities, such as like beading or creation story talks, things like that. But I think just the day-to-day talk really helps me unify with those women, but also be reminded of the constant struggle they face, but also our ancestor stories in it. Yeah.
For me, I think it's kind of twofold. So I would say first, the most rewarding for myself is just hanging out with my family, having those conversations, lot of laughing, a lot of teasing, and then we get to talk about, each one of their families and their children and how they're doing. And so it's a way for us to kind of exchange what's happening amongst all of us. And we do that regularly. We'll get together. I think just a couple weeks ago, I piled in a car, grabbed my sisters, and we took off because we wanted to go hang out with the other ones. So that would be informal. I would say that the next step up from that, when it's more community focused, would be the powwows. We do a lot of that, and that's a lot of us just getting together and seeing all of our extended community that we've known, well, I've known since I was a child, and they were yelling at me to get out of the way. So I think between the two of them, I get that the personal fulfillment of being around my family and my extended family, but then when I go to the powwows, there's a lot of community that happens there. So.
Regarding the term gossip, first you used gossip, which carries some negative weight to it, but then you switched back and forth between gossip and women's talk. Regarding gossip and those negative connotations, what do you have to say about the negative side about it and the ethics, the clause of gossip?
Well, okay, so I would say that obviously the use of gossip is a little bit tongue-in-cheek, right? It's kind of a inflammatory statement to make. Gossip is great. But I think it also is a way to reclaim something that normally brought women shame, right? It's an act that was considered shameful. Oh, those women are talking amongst themselves, they must be gossiping, right? And I think that that's on purpose. So I think there is a sense of power in reclaiming a term that has been specifically used to shame women from having those kinds of talks amongst themselves, especially the kinds of talks that have value to them. So, somebody's husband is behaving badly, it's not just talk when you're saying that's not appropriate. Now we're assigning moral value to that's inappropriate, that's not how it should work. But like any tool, it can be misused, so yeah, of course, gossip, like I said, like any tool can have something, it can have bad attributed to it. But I think the important thing is, and the reason I switched back and forth between the two is that I think that when you're talking about gossip and you're saying these statements that are kind of meant to shock, right? They're meant to be like, oh, is that kind of, are those kinds of conversations good? Are they bad? It kind of tends to make you reevaluate your position on that. And so I do switch back and forth, I think, because I don't always want the statement to be like a gotcha moment. So that's how I was using it.
I do also think it's important to understand that the Western sense also uses a sort of dichotomy of truth and falsehood, or validity and negative, when in reality it might just be in the middle. And I think this also applies to gossip in the sense that it doesn't necessarily have to be truth or false, but maybe we can find a middle ground of it as well.
Well, everything you said was so insightful. I'm very, very impressed. And I just like, I think that's so true in that, like, I feel like in life you need to go through and move through, and like, even if you're having an emotion, if it's not the most logical emotion, like, you're not going to go anywhere with it if you don't talk to somebody who has wisdom on it. So I think that's really lovely. I really like the section where you kind of discuss some of the practical ways that comes in, like when you're talking about who you should work with, and like who is like a safe person to go to for certain resources and stuff, especially among immigrants or among Indigenous women. And I think that was really cool. And it reminded me of Stone Butch Blues, where a lot of these lesbians were having to do the same things, where like, this workplace is safe for butches, this one's not. Like, and I think there's a real power to that, but there's also like a danger there when you kind of are sharing with somebody that you don't know information that could be revealing to you. And how do you think that women are able to deal with the kind of vulnerability that comes with giving information to people, even people they don't really know as well? Because in a lot of these cases, it's like trusted people and it's like discussion with people. But I also think there's a real amazing community building power in like, hey, we don't know each other so well. We're like coworkers who talked 3 times, but if you need, here's this resource for you. Like, how do you think women can do that? And I don't know if that's wherever you want to go with that. I don't know. But.
I'll just add a little bit. I think it's important to almost trust your intuition as well, and because as you said, a lot of the times you're talking about issues that are almost life-threatening if told to the wrong person. So we have to really be careful. And I think just taking a step of maybe seeing if you trust that person is a good step towards that, although that is something pretty hard.
I would say that it's like any other relationship. You know, those are things that are developed over time. One of the benefits of gossip, though, is that bad actors, they get outed pretty quickly. And so, you know, if you have those channels already open, I think that kind of knowledge would get handed down pretty quickly. So.
Excuse me. So you mentioned safe spaces. As a man, I can empathize, but I can never understand the lived experience of women. So what guidance could you offer me and maybe the other men in this room of like how to help create those safe spaces for the women in our life, or just guidance in that way?
Okay, this is what I would say. I would say that if I was a man and I wanted to participate somehow in this, I think I would probably want to avoid the desire to lead. I think that the desire to fix things, at least amongst my brothers, is strong. I come to them with a problem, or I want to have a conversation, and they're like, how do we fix this? What do we do? And sometimes I just want to talk. Sometimes I just want to have a conversation. Sometimes I just need a safe space where I can just let things out and it doesn't have to become a thing. So I think uncentering yourself would be a good starting spot.
I also do think just stepping back and allowing women to have those spaces is a great way to start. We often see this in tribes who are matriarchal, and in reality, they're just listening and supporting those choices. And so I think just taking that step back and letting, like, protecting their space, but also letting them hold that space is essential.
I want to jump back to how to identify the safe spaces. As a member of the LGBT community, there are visual cues that I can signal and ways that I kind of pick up on people who I might identify with and feel safe communicating with. Do you find that women also have the same kind of ways to signal, like, oh, I'm a safe space, let's communicate, let's talk?
They do. I think, though, this brings us back to, I think there's a way that it's being understood, excuse me, my voice. I think the strength that comes from gossip is that these aren't formal organizations. So we're not formally creating these organizations where we need to worry about signaling, really. These are relationships that are nurtured or created, with people that you know, and those people know other people. So it's a very, I think, informal, organic process that happens. As far as having safe spaces when it starts to become a larger thing, as you're organizing. Yeah, I suppose then, depending on what you're organizing for, there'll be cues that people just pick up on, But again, I think it's a very informal, organic type of formation. Yeah.
Hi, thank you so much for that wonderful presentation. I really loved it. This is diverting a little bit from the topic of safe spaces and returning to kind of the terminology of gossip and the way that you kind of used that in your presentation. And also kind of, sorry, I'm rambling a little bit. I really liked the use of stories, of mythology within your presentation to kind of help boost your points. And I think that the approaching this topic through gossip and through talking about different spaces that have formed to give women a voice where they maybe haven't had one before, or to try and build that. I guess I'm wondering if you guys could talk a little bit about if there are connections that you see between the practice of storytelling as a community practice and gossip more like directly, and where you see maybe that diverting, or if gossip was just a different form of storytelling that developed in spaces where women were not able to speak as directly. Does that question make sense?
I do think that they are a little bit different. I would argue, I think within storytelling and origin stories, we have to understand that there is a validity that comes from these stories, meaning that since they're sacred, they make sure they're passed down with the right information, and the people who pass those stories down are also carefully taught and make sure each detail is correct. Versus gossip, I do think sometimes it's, like Autumn was saying, it is more of an informal channel. So I think that's where they can be different. But they do intertwine in the sense that at the end it elevates women's voices and your connection to your ancestors.
Even the story that we told today, the Spider Woman story, it's kind of like a play on the story. It's not how it would be recited in a spiritual setting. So I don't know if there were handouts for this, but you'll notice on the notes, if there are, it says at the bottom too that it's a stylized version of it, specifically because we want to avoid sharing sacred stories in public spaces. So.
There's another question. And while my great friend here is getting that microphone back, I'm just going to ask you all a quick question myself. Could you speak to like the importance of the mundane space, the everyday space as it relates to women's identities and women's talk and gossip? Because that everyday, mundane, I find is often the space that largely in Western culture is discounted, right? And it's not treated as a space where, like, quote, as you all mentioned, right, important things happen. And I would love for you all to kind of speak to that.
Sure. So I would say it really is in the everyday conversations that you find out about people's lives, right? When you go to, say, a political rally, you're not going to talk about, well, you know what, yesterday my cat got hit by a car, and this thing happened, and that's not the time and place for it. You're doing other things. But when you have these mundane conversations, these everyday conversations, that's when I think that you can exercise care and you can start to realize, at least that's how it works for our community. When you're sitting around and you're having, a coffee and you're just, relaxing with somebody and they start to tell you what's happening in their lives, they start to tell you what's happening with their children, what's happening with their brother, and there's all this information being thrown at you and all this information that you're sharing. And there's a thing that happens in our tribe, and it used to be actually quite obnoxious when I was younger and I didn't understand it, but there's this, for children, you're not really supposed to tell them what to do, right? Because they're individuals, they have autonomy and they're supposed to be respected as well. So you don't just go do this, go do that. So there's this kind of unspoken way that you are told to do things. So my grandmother all the time would be like, oh, I'm so thirsty, I wish I had some water. And you're supposed to pick up on that and go, oh, okay, and grandma wants water, so I'll go and get her some water. And you pick up on these little cues. And when I was younger, I was frustrated because I'm like, why can't you just tell me what you want? Why can't you just say what you want and tell me to do it? It'd be easier and faster. But I think that there's something that happens in that moment. When you are respecting somebody else's autonomy, you're teaching them that they need to listen for cues. They need to listen for the things that are happening. So I would need to listen to what my grandmother was saying and then think about how my actions were affecting her, or how they could affect her. And so I see that same kind of care in listening when other people are talking about what's happening in their lives. You're listening, oh, that person's cat got hit. I bet you, they might be having finance problems because they needed to pay for a vet, or I bet you, they didn't have time to go get food today because they were at the vet all day. So you start to listen for those cues and then you start to respond to them. So I think in the mundane, everyday kind of communication, that's where you find the pieces that you need to offer care and to offer support and to really become a community by those types of interactions.
And I also do think that this informal talk helps strengthen relationships. And when we strengthen personal relationships and kinship ties, we see a stronger community. And when we see a stronger community, we see movements take place because that relationship was built, and then the community was built even stronger. You see a stronger type of resilience that before you had those informal talks, maybe, for example, if you didn't have that informal talk, maybe that strong relationship wouldn't be there and build that stronger community and then that movement. So I think they're all tied together.
Yeah, and it gives you strength, right? So when you've got your community behind you, it was a retired member of parliament, and he was talking one time, Tony Barr, I think was his name, and he was talking about how true democracy is just one of the most revolutionary things because the power, starts at the bottom and it works its way up. And he was saying, I think if I was trying to circumvent the voice of the people, I would make sure, and I'm paraphrasing all this, but I would make sure that those people were not able to participate. I would keep them hungry. I would keep them sick. I would keep them, insecure with housing. And so I think when you've got a community behind you, right, and you know that your needs are going to be met, that immediately opens you up to be able to participate in other types of movements, or to set time aside to go vote, or set time aside to go support somebody. You're not alone anymore, and it doesn't feel overwhelming. So, yeah. Sorry.
Okay. So first of all, I just want to say thank you. I think you guys did a phenomenal job of getting rid of all the dogmatism that comes with gossip itself. As for my question, I just wanted to ask the both of you, as a leader, which values and principles do you both think should be fostered and promoted the most to build a strong community, especially throughout women and in a capitalistic society nowadays?
Probably one of the strongest values I prioritize in leadership is reciprocity. So the notion that whatever you give, you also receive, right? I think oftentimes in government and we don't see this. So I think a strong leader will listen and give back that listening power as well. So it's reciprocated between both parties, both communities. And I think that is when change and movements can really happen.
And I think listening. I think, if you can listen to somebody, you're not only learning new knowledge, you're also giving them comfort. I think that if you listen to enough people, it gives you different ideas. I think you don't get hung up on your own only way of doing things. So I think listening is a really important, tool, value. Yeah.
Any other questions? Oh, yeah, there's one more. Elena's getting her exercise today. One side to the other. Oh, and then one in the middle.
So when I think of gossip, usually, especially in like the modern age with so much access to information, my biggest worry is usually like verifying the integrity of the information I'm hearing. So I'm curious on the topic of like this being an epistemic resistance and maintaining a knowledge base that is like correct for everyone. How does that work with like perhaps misinformation or bad actors?
So I think it's important to understand, as I mentioned earlier, the West often doesn't have a relationship built on truth and validity, so this is an issue, whereas you see indigenous nations and communities that have to have this validity and truth because of your community members, so this truth is almost ensured because since everything is sacred and because you care about everyone else, the lies can really harm people, so you see this truth to it. So I think this is a really hard question, and it's a great question. But I think first understanding that we can have validity within gossip in the same sense, right? If we as community members ensure that truth and we hear it and we can verify it in that moment and then continue that pattern, you almost have that validity ensured. But I do know with that there's obviously holes, so that's one way. It's a hard question.
Yeah, and then I think in the flannel here.
So it seems like a lot of the resistance to try and have a voice, it seems like women haven't been respected as much. And I know that men naturally like to lead, but you guys told me that you don't like it when we lead. And so how can we meet in the middle and have a good balance to have more respect for each other rather than just have this one resistance on one side?
Okay, so I think that there's a problem when you are equating matriarchy with patriarchy, right? So in a patriarchal society, the men lead and the women follow, right? They follow the lead of the man who's in charge. But matriarchy or matrilineal societies, that's not how it works. I think if you're trying to do the opposite of what patriarchy is, then you're coming at it's a false notion. So matriarchy just means that you're following the women's line, or you're following the women's lead. However, men are in office, and we vote them into office along with the rest of the tribe. They're in positions of leadership. I think matriarchy is more concerned, at least within indigenous communities, is more concerned with there being a balance, with there being voices amongst each. I think the reason that women are given the final say-so in these particular tribes is simply because we're the ones who raise the kids. We're the ones who are bringing life into the world and then taking care of them. That's the future of the tribe. So as the future, of the tribe and the ones who are raising them, then I think it goes to say that we should have the final say on decisions that are going to affect in the long term. That's not to say that men don't have wonderful ideas and that they're not respected in matriarchal societies. They definitely are. I would just argue that in a society, especially the communities, in Utah, there's a very strong preference to follow what the men say. There's a very strong preference for the men to want to lead. And you say you think that it's natural that men want to lead. I would argue that everybody has it within them to be a leader. I don't think it's gender specific. I think a specific gender is generally pushed towards that, but I don't think that they're naturally more of a leader than women, since I come from a long line of women who lead, so.
Okay, and on that note, please join me in giving the speakers another round of applause for their wonderful talk and presentation. And if you haven't done so already, be sure to sign in with the QR code. That's going to ensure that we can contact your teacher and so that you can get credit for this. Thank you again. Join us for the next session. There's going to be some pizza. You might see it. You might smell it already. Thank you again. Thank you so much. Wonderful. You did great. Couldn't tell at all. Wonderful. So great. Yeah. Thank you.